Well, what if you had millions of users using your software? You wouldn't have just one single server hosting your entire software, right? Because it can go down at any point. Just as if you were running a restaurant, you wouldn't have just one waiter serving everyone, right? By the way, the word server is just another word for waiter, as you might know. So this kind of connects well with the very first video of the series where I talked about how many of the software related concepts are actually borrowed from the real physical world. By the way, if you're not aware, this video is actually part of a long ongoing series on the basics of system design. And I highly recommend that you binge watch through this entire series and you'll be great, maybe even the top 1% at planning for production grade software once you've watched it. Anyway, so you'd ideally have multiple servers running your software. Now, what happens if some of the servers get overloaded and some don't get enough traffic? And worse, what if one of the servers actually goes down? What do you do then? In such scenarios, you need something called as a load balancer. They're basically a traffic distribution and control layer that sits in front of your servers and decides where each connection or request should go. And it's the responsibility of the load balancer to understand which server is overloaded, which one doesn't have enough traffic, and which one is down, so that it can route the traffic to the right server. So load balancers essentially help distribute traffic for high availability and low latency, and that's why they're critical for modern softwares. So you've understood what load balancers are. Now it's time to try to understand how they actually work. Now, all of this is based on what we already know about TCP/IP and HTTP. If you remember, we already learned TCP versus UDP, the TCP handshake, and how HTTP requests and responses work on top of TCP. So we're going to use all of that knowledge to try to understand what a load balancer can do and why they became such a big deal in microservices and serverless architecture. Now, there's one thing you definitely need to know is that load balancers actually operate at two different layers of the OSI, at layer 4 and layer 7. And if you remember from this OSI diagram that we had seen in the beginning few videos of this series, the layer 4 is the transport layer and layer 7 is the application layer. And it's really interesting how load balancers work at these layers. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how this works. Basically, a load balancer is a decision point in front of your servers. So when two devices need to talk over the internet, first they establish a connection. And you know how to do that, right? Sync, sending packets and so on. And once the connection has been established, only then do they start transferring information. So that's why the key question is, does the load balancer make decisions based on connections, which is layer 4, or based on the application requests, which is layer 7? So let's understand the load balancers at both these layers. Now, layer 4 load balancing distributes traffic using IP addresses, ports, and transport protocol states like TCP and UDP without inspecting application payloads at layer 4. The load balancer is basically managing connections. So for TCP, the load balancer is stateful at the connection level. That means there's a contract. One client TCP connection maps to exactly one backend connection. And all segments for that TCP connection must go to the same backend server. Otherwise, sequence numbers don't match and the connection breaks. Key examples of layer 4 load balancers include hardware and software solutions like AWS Network Load Balancer, Azure Load Balancer, and Nginx. Now, there are two common ways to implement L4 behavior. The first one is the NAT mode, and also called the gateway style. The load balancer rewrites packet addresses in this style, and it's basically saying this was sent to the virtual IP, but I'll translate it to the backend server IP. And you know how NAT works with virtual IP addresses and the actual IP addresses because I made a video about NAT just a few videos back in this series. And the second mode is proxy mode. The load balancer terminates the client connection and creates a new connection to the backend. So you end up with client to load balancer and load balancer to server as separate TCP connections. So NAT mode is more packet forwarding with translation and proxy mode is more connection level mediation. Now, L4 load balancers can be extremely fast, and these high performance L4 load balancers often do something called as connection warming. So when they start up, they proactively establish multiple TCP connections to backend servers. That way, when user traffic arrives, the balancer can reuse hot connections and avoid paying the TCP handshake latency during the request path. And if you remember the handshake, sync, connection warming tries to keep that cost off the critical path. Now we've learned about the L4 load balancer, and before we continue learning about the L7 load balancer, I want to take a few seconds break and go a bit off topic. And I want to tell you about the Algoroq cohort, which is a live cohort that I run with usually about 10 to 15 senior engineers in a cohort. You might know that there are no cohorts that exist for senior engineers that already know the basics of system design and architecture and are wanting to build next generation production software in the post AI age. So this is a 12 weeks program, and we cover topics like advanced system design, AI native system design, architecture, all of this for the post AI world, and tips and tricks to using AI coding tools, but from a senior engineering perspective. And I'm planning the next cohort, which is actually going to be my third cohort, and it's going to be around mid or end of May 2026. So I want you to go through the algoroq.io website, and I want you to check out these topics we're going to cover and fill up the form if you're interested. And once you do that, I'll check to see if you're a great fit and we'll set up a call with you. Now it's about $2,500 for the entire live cohort, but you can watch the pre-recorded videos for $800 as well. And I teach this cohort personally. It's a great experience. And once you fill up the form, you can also talk to any of the other people who have attended the cohort previously and decide if you want to go ahead. All right, now let's talk about the layer 7 load balancer. Now it's similar to layer 4, but it's actually a full proxy that routes based on application level content like HTTP headers, paths, cookies, or gRPC metadata. Layer 7 requires the load balancer to understand the protocol. So HTTP, gRPC, and WebSockets are common. So by now we've understood even more in detail of what load balancers do, but let's dig a bit deeper and understand how it decides which server gets the request. And that's where load balancing algorithms come in. Let's start with the simplest one, round robin. Imagine you have 3 servers. The load balancer just sends requests like this, server 1 to server 2, so to server 3, and then back to server 1. It doesn't just think, it actually rotates. And it works sequentially, so it just rotates traffic between multiple servers. And this is how it decides how to rotate or how to distribute traffic between servers. So let's take a scenario, and you can see that in the diagram. Imagine you have 3 servers. And the load balancer, what it does in round robin is it just sends requests like this. First, it sends to server A, then to server B, then to server C, and then back to server A. And if there are 4 servers, like another one with server D, it just goes through them one by one and then again back to server 1. So it doesn't think, it just rotates. But this only works in some conditions, and it works well when all the servers are identical and traffic is fairly uniform. But the problem is it's not aware, it's not intelligent, and it doesn't care if one server is overloaded or slow. It's just rotating traffic between the 4 different servers it has. A more intelligent approach is called the least connections. Here, the load balancer looks at which server currently has the least number of active requests and then sends the next request there. So instead of blindly rotating, it adapts in real time. And this works much better when requests take different amounts of time, or some servers are busier than others, but it still has a limitation. It assumes all requests are equally heavy. An even more interesting approach is power of 2 choices, or P2C. And instead of checking all servers, the load balancer randomly picks 2 servers and sends the request to the one with fewer connections. That's it. Surprisingly, this performs almost as well as least connections, but with much lower overhead. And this is widely used in large-scale systems because it's simple, fast, and scales really well. Now, sometimes you don't want random distribution. You want the same user to always hit the same server, and that's where IP hashing comes in. Here, the load balancer takes the user's IP address, runs a hash function, and maps it to a specific server. So the same user always gets matched to the same server. And this is highly useful for session persistence, caching, or stateful applications. But the downside is if a server goes down, the mapping breaks and traffic redistribution can get really messy. So we've learned quite a bit about load balancers in this video, about what they are, how they work, and all the different various algorithms. And I just want to leave you with a rule of thumb when it comes to deciding between layer 4 and layer 7 load balancing. Use layer 4 when you care about maximum throughput and minimal overhead, especially for things like gaming or video delivery. And use layer 7 when you need application intelligence like path-based routing, web application firewall rules, cookie-based session persistence, and centralized authentication. So making this video was a lot of fun, and I also had to create all these diagrams, and I'm sure you appreciate how much effort it takes. And nobody really makes these kind of videos now ever since the post AI slop. So if you really appreciate this and all the knowledge that I'm sharing, Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends, and definitely like and comment on the video. And you already know that if you want to take your system design knowledge to the next level, you can join my cohort on algoroq.io, and the link for that is in the description and my comments. I'll see you in the next video.